Hello, and you are listening to Both Sides of the Aisle, a very special, very unsupervised version.
Natalie's not here.
She's not here, but I am Shireen Ghorbani, former county council person. John Dougall.
Former state auditor.
Yes. And we are thrilled to be here with you, listeners, as we kind of go through some of the week's news. It's been, I think, just a continuing really heavy time in our politic, in our state, certainly.
Oh, come on. We're going to censor that comment right now.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, here we go. Turning to the issue of censorship right off the top. I think in the wake of the assassination of Charlie Kirk, one of the most distressing things, I guess on a personal level for me, was just how many people felt it was necessary to just fully broadcast every thought they've ever had, in perhaps maybe with very little reflection or thought towards a kind of our general common humanity. So that was frustrating, I think, for me on a personal...
Opining on anything. It's like sometimes you can think something and just don't put it in words.
You just keep your mouth shut.
Yeah, keep your mouth shut. Social media isn't the place for everything.
No. And on the other side of that, I guess I would say for me, is this sort of broader, really troubling trend that started to emerge in terms of Vice President Vance saying, if you see somebody saying something that rubs you the wrong way, take it up with them, and hell, feel free to report them to their employer, right? Like that was a comment that was made last week.
So you're saying cancel culture belongs to the left and the right?
Well, perhaps. But then it really escalated in some comments on Jimmy Kimmel Live. Jimmy Kimmel made comments over Charlie Kirk's killer and was abruptly
And
pulled.
who is Jimmy Kimmel for some of us that don't follow late night TV?
So the removal came really in the backdrop of a business deal, which I think we kind of all could have anticipated. A $6.2 billion merger between Nexstar, one of the biggest owners of ABC affiliates, and Tenga, which requires FCC approval. So the reason that matters is that the remarks of Kimmel were... Shortly thereafter, we saw Chair Brendan Carr, so FCC Chair, the Federal Communications Commission, is that correct? Chair, say to a podcaster, Benny Johnson, when you look at the conduct that has taken place by Jimmy Kimmel, it appears to be some of the sickest conduct possible. I mean, look, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. These companies can find ways to change conduct, to take action, frankly, on Kimmel, or, there's going to be additional work for the FCC ahead, which sounds pretty much
Ted
like
Cruz described it as a mob boss.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, Ted Cruz, of all people, described this as mob boss rhetoric. Give me your take on what's going on
And he pointed
here.
out a very valid thing from my perspective. The political pendulum swings, as we've discussed. And so if we're heavy-handed in trying to censor certain folks, when Republicans or conservatives are in the minority, we're going to pay the price. And so this is what Senator Cruz was warning folks about, is this game will not turn out well for conservatives. So don't go down that path. And I totally agree with him. I mean, from my perspective, whether it's this administration, the previous administration, trying to silence voices that they disagree with, to threaten businesses, whether it was the Biden administration, social media companies, or today when it's the Trump administration and TV media companies, I'm very disturbed by that. Now, I couldn't care less about Jimmy Kimmel, and if it's the affiliates saying we don't want to air it and the market is not there for Kimmel and he loses his show because the market's not there, don't care. That's God bless America. But when it comes to the government stepping in and encroaching and threatening, when we talk about the First Amendment, most people don't understand it. The First Amendment is not really about your right to say something. It's about restricting the government so that you can speak your piece. And so when the government steps out of those bounds and starts to threaten that, and even when we start looking at licenses of the FCC, guys like me think the FCC has lived beyond its purpose decades ago. So that's where I have concerns.
Yeah. Maybe you and George Carlin, I guess, might have that in common. But I guess...
And this is where some people they fail to understand kind of the broadcast airwaves and the rules that come with that. And because when you're flipping the TV, you oftentimes don't necessarily know that's ABC going off over the broadcast airwaves versus HBO.
Right?
That's not.
Right.
And different rules apply. And this is where, for some folks, they felt like Kimmel was lying. And I tell folks there's different facts out there, and there's either, there's stuff that he doesn't know. And so therefore his statement may be wrong, but it's not necessarily a lie. Mm-hmm. Or he may have known something that was and intentionally said it and it was false. And so some of the FCC rules kick in there. Or there may be some information that we don't yet know whether or not it's true or not. And we still have to wait for more information to come out to understand the truthfulness of or the falsity of the statement that Kimmel was making.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I'll say for me, I do think the crackdown from this administration on speech that dares to defy specifically Trump, right? It feels ominous. I think that there's certainly a broader chilling effect that everything, I just think about, wasn't it just a couple of weeks ago, we were back to talking about whether or not you can burn an American flag. Protected, right? Like that's protected. It's been proven over and over again. But Trump came out and said he was going to throw people in jail for that too. It just feels like an escalation and a punitive environment in ways that are just feel like they're escalating. They feel scary to me, and I also just feel like it just creates a culture of fear.
Yeah, well, and you talked about that chilling effect. You don't actually have to the government doesn't actually have to restrict the speech. It can overstep its bounds when it starts to have a chilling effect on that speech.
Yeah. Where
people start to avoid it just for their own safety or security, or, in this case, a $6 billion deal that's on the table that has to get approval.
Yeah.
And we saw a few months ago the CBS deal and settling a lawsuit when they had something before the federal government that needed to approve a merger there.
A merger, which did go through. So I'm going to turn our attention to another issue that caught my attention around, I would say, silencing or deafening around information. But the Trump administration decided to end the government's annual report on hunger in America. The Trump administration is ending the federal government's report because they state it has become over-politicized and rife with inaccuracies. So this decision comes 2.5 months after the president signed legislation sharply reducing food aid to the poor. So this was part of the budget reconciliation bill that cut SNAP benefits to millions. And also, I have to say this is in the backdrop of ever increasing grocery prices. This president ran on a populist agenda saying he was on day one going to reduce prices at the grocery store. The bacon and eggs were going to be cheaper. They are not. They're actually increasing in cost. And we know that further exacerbates the hunger problem. In our state, we're lucky that we are not one of the worst, but 1 in 7 people are hungry in Utah and 1 in 6 children. About 50% of the households that have SNAP benefits that are on SNAP in our state right now include children. So we know that this is a program that families utilize to, in very meager ways, close the gaps around food security. But give me your take on this, because I would say if a issue is that it is rife, the data is rife with inaccuracies, I can think of a solution that wouldn't be canceling collecting it.
Well, coming from this perspective, I've had complaints for a long time with this topic. They talk a lot about food insecurity, and that sounds like one thing, but when you dive into it, it's a wholly different thing. If you went to bed hungry, missing one meal out of an entire month, well, you were food insecure. Hogwash. That is not food insecurity. For most folks, they think food insecurity is you don't really know where your next meal is going to come from. If you're going to have something to eat, that's a whole different matter. And so this has been blown out of proportion in terms of what it is. The second thing from my perspective is this is not really a federal issue. This is a state issue. Stuff should be managed and taken care of at the state level. It should not be pushed at the federal level. Federal government should not be in this.
So I would just disagree with you so fundamentally. I believe
fundamentally.
I really believe that our issues around nutrition and hunger in this country are actually far worse than are reported. When independent companies do surveys of their employees, they find that there are many folks that do not know where their next meal is coming from. And I think with the increasing costs that we're all experiencing in this modern moment, really getting nutritious, high quality food is out of reach for a lot of folks. And I think the thing that's also difficult is navigating these systems of support is complex. Like even just filling out some of these applications is troublesome. And we live in a state that, when we had the opportunity to extend and continue food benefits through the summer for kids in Title I schools, I believe we had to put pressure on the state for them to do it. So while I understand the kind of notion like we would like to see this at the state level, I'm afraid that we live live in a state that doesn't take hunger as seriously as we should. But I'm going to turn attention to another thing, which is kind of tied to the economy or economics more broadly. So the Federal Reserve voted to lower interest rates for the first time this year. What's your take on that?
It was going to happen. I mean, given what was going on in the economy, given inflationary concerns, given job loss concerns and so forth, I think it was just a matter of time, and the pressure clearly the president was putting on, it was just going to happen. Now, some wish it would have been a bigger drop, a bigger cut rather than just a quarter point. But we'll have to watch and see what takes place there.
So when you see a drop like that, I mean, how long, when you were like thinking about changing interest rates at the federal level, when you were at the auditor's office or even as a representative in our legislature, like how long until you saw drops like that kind of come down to impact the state or decisions that the state was making?
I'm going to say that's a better question for Natalie.
Yeah, probably.
That was not really something I can recall us as a legislator or a state auditor that I really looked at and worried about. It's much more kind of in the broader
milieu, the backdrop.
This is what the economists are looking at, and this is what they're analyzing.
Yeah, I think about it as it related to, receiving the budget as a council person and the broader economic environment and trying to think about, the ways that money moved around at the county, which is the second largest budget in the state after the state government. And these things certainly had an impact, but I would say that it seemed like it took a lot longer for changes that were happening at the federal level to really impact decisions that were happening at the local level. But, these things take time.
Well, even decisions at the state level take a long time to ripple out there.
Yeah. Well, you're listening to a very special and largely so far civil,
civil but unsupervised
version of Both Sides of the Aisle, and we'll be right back. You're listening to Both Sides of the Aisle on Utah Public Radio. We love to hear from listeners like you. If you would like to send us a comment, email bsotapodcast@gmail.com. That's bsotapodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Shireen Ghorbani on the left.
John Dougall on the right.
And we are unsupervised as Natalie was unable to be with us today.
That doesn't happen very often.
But listeners, we are grateful you're sticking with us as we have many interesting topics to cover.
And Shireen and I still get along without a referee being here.
We do. No, I will just say we did get some listener feedback on your, John, thoughts related to
she thought I was wrong.
Accessing the vaccine, COVID vaccine.
Yeah. And maybe I was not articulate enough about what I was trying to describe because, in essence, her complaint sounded like what I was describing. So go ahead.
Well, I'll just say that I was able to get my COVID booster over the weekend, was not able to get it for my child because even though the CDC panel had voted to recommend, saying this was an issue of personal choice, that if people wanted to get it, that they were basically fine with it, they voted on that, I believe, on Friday. I had reached out to my primary care doc and received a prescription, and went down and got that filled at my local pharmacy. So my husband and I were there. We were ready to go get the vaccine. And it was really interesting because I said, I've got my son here. I'd love to get him boosted as well. And she said, oh, we're unable to do that unless you've got a prescription. And I said, well, I just saw that the CDC panel had voted that we could do it. And she said, well, now it has to go to the head of the CDC for signature. We don't have a head of the CDC right now. I think we may have an acting director, but I'm really curious if this is going to further slow down the process. But would just encourage people, certainly consult with your doctor, do what is right for you in your life. But I would say that it is possible to still get it, but you do need a prescription for now.
Well, my understanding from the prescription is really driven by state law.
Yeah.
And that was my key thing, is part of this is being controlled and dictated by the state, because the state, to me, was too beholden on the CDC. And you can see some other states that are teaming together to say, independent of the CDC, we're going to start making recommendations for our region.
Yeah.
Which I think, from my perspective, wanting to get power out of the federal government is a step in the good direction.
Yeah. Well, I'm one of those strange people that, I don't know, I can't say with total certainty, but I haven't had it yet. Or not to my knowledge, my family hasn't had it either. And I just,
COVID?
Yeah. And I find this strange. So I'm kind of trying to just stick with what's been working for me. But again, consult your doctor. We are not physicians.
Wow.
Neither is the head of the CD or the head Health and Human Services, but we can shift. And
I spent I spent Christmas of, I think it was December 2020 with my parents,
Yeah.
quarantined with them as we all got COVID. I went over with them and
Tough.
and they had exposed me to it. And so I was then
you were stuck with them.
Stuck with them through Christmas. Yes, not what I imagined.
Not the happiest holiday you've probably ever had.
No.
Well, let's shift it to truly much more local or state level.
Let me touch on one other thing. There's a lot of stuff going on about vaccinations for children. What I'm hearing is it's not as big as some people think. Part of the dynamic is hepatitis B. Rather than having to get it immediately when the child is born, there's like a 30-day window in which parents can decide on that. And then there's the MMRV vaccine, and my understanding is for kids under 4, they're separating that into 2 separate shots. But for kids 4 and older, they're keeping it together as one shot, looking at the health and safety of children.
Yeah.
For those young children, when it's combined, there's an excessive risk of fever that can cause other issues.
Yeah.
And so to me, those are good steps to say, okay, we're not getting rid of it. We're doing some tweaks to try and make sure kids' health is protected.
I think one of the things that I remember from working more closely in a large health system was one of the concerns that people had around delaying is that families don't come back. And so if you're lucky enough to have a pediatrician, if you're lucky enough to have a primary care doc, I just really encourage people to have those conversations with their doctors, with medical experts. But let's shift to talking about Utah redistricting. So what is happening at our... Well, we're recording a little early in the week. It is
on
Monday
afternoon. We're here in the bunker.
Yeah.
The legislature met this morning, the redistricting committee. They laid out 5 different proposals, proposal A through E. Each of those try and better address the concerns of the court. Now, to remind folks, the legislature is still petitioning that they think the courts ruled improperly, but they are trying to comply with the district court. They are putting out these other maps. They had that initial hearing. My understanding is they're going to have another hearing on September 25th. Then there's a 10-day window in which the public can comment, and then a special session on October 6th to adopt new maps.
Yeah.
Now, for those, Shireen, like yourself, that are in Salt Lake County, one of the complaints has been in the past that the legislature divided up Salt Lake County 4 different ways.
Yeah.
My understanding from looking at these maps right now, there is no way to have Salt Lake County all self-contained. Salt Lake County is too populous for any single congressional district. So it will get split. And in each of these maps, it gets split 2 ways. And there's different, 3 maps are kind of an east-west split. One of the maps is much more a north-south kind of split.
Yeah.
And that's...
population driven.
So now you've got a bunch of Democrats that are sitting there eyeing, hoping that there's a chance that they can run in the upcoming election and control one of the seats.
Yeah. Well, so one other thing that piqued my interest is I saw a proposed piece of legislation.
Potential open seat? No.
No. Well, you and I have both been there.
I've been there, done that, yeah.
not really interested in doing that. But hope that good folks do still continue to think about public service. But one of the things that caught my attention was that there is legislation that is proposed going along with this that I believe is being sponsored by Brady Brammer, that in my initial reading of it looks to really act against the will of the voters who passed Better Boundaries, which had kind of 2 pieces, right? So this nonpartisan group that would create maps to be submitted to the legislature for approval. But it also had, and we've had numerous conversations about guidelines that really told the legislature, if you're going to make these maps, then there are certain things that you have to adhere by. Not dividing counties or cities beyond what is necessary, what is necessary, right? So right now, if I'm not mistaken,
keeping communities of interest together to the greatest extent possible.
To the greatest extent possible, right? And so you think about that in communities. Certainly, our state experienced redlining. That certain folks live in certain places by design in our state, just like in others. But
redlining is not keeping Republicans together.
No, I was going to say, but we have. I think not entirely, but less really clear Latino communities or Native communities, but we still have that very much in Utah when we think about concentrations of folks, whether it's living close to Navajo Nation or even the west side of Salt Lake City into West Valley, which is a majority minority city in our county. So there are these guidelines in the Better Boundaries decision to say these community of interest should be kept together. And what we see now is, if I'm not mistaken, Mill Creek has all 4. Is that right? Mill Creek is overly cut up for reasons that I think people on my side of the aisle would say are to the benefit of Republicans in the state. But this will be an interesting process
because gets represented by 4 different folks.
Because Brady Brammer, it looks, is proposing a piece of legislation to go along with these maps that I think we should all be paying very close attention to, because I think it may be a roundabout way of trying to undo or supersede the guidelines that were put forward in Better Boundaries.
And I haven't had a chance to look at his proposed legislation, but I think it was last week I mentioned, when you watch this process, don't just look at the maps. The legislature gets to control the rules around which the court interprets what the legislature does. And so also watch for those other factors that come into play.
Yeah, that's right. So another piece of news that caught my attention.
And one of the key things, just to remind folks, is these maps have to be adopted by November 10th. So the county clerks have sufficient time to get it all in place. So when candidates sign up on January 2nd or whenever it is next year, boom, everybody's good to go for the next upcoming election.
Yeah. So I think, I pay attention to what our Republicans in the legislature kind of put out. And there was this very wholesome video that came out on their Instagram basically saying, people didn't think we would comply, but we're complying. Just pay close attention to what that actually means, listeners, because complying but changing the rules along the way does not feel like complying to me.
Well, one of the interesting dynamics also, the legislature typically talks about donut holes and pizza slices.
Yeah.
So when you look at the maps, the concept of a donut hole is this little self-contained circle.
Yeah.
The pizza slices are really the concept, which is we want parts of urban and rural Utah to be represented in every single congressional district.
Yeah.
So as you look at the maps, look for the donut holes and look for pizza slices.
Yeah. But then also, I think it's really important to question this logic, because what I hear all the time is, well, we want people to balance rural and urban. We want people to balance the interests. Well, guess what? It's too expensive to buy food in this country. Housing is out of reach for many families in this state. When we think about the cost of healthcare that is exploding, about to get more expensive because of legislation signed by all of our Republican, or sponsor, I guess I should say, voted for by all of our representatives in Congress, the issues that we share as Utahns are actually quite common. I think the difference is solutions. And frankly, I don't see too many people in our state leading out in our federal representation on really meaningful solutions when it comes to the everyday issues people are facing. So can we let's change our tack to talk maybe a little bit more about what you're seeing in terms of the national attention on our governor, Spencer Cox. So there is a sense that he has wandered into no man's land with a kinder, healer versus rougher politician presentation or style. I'm wondering, as you are sort of watching the attention from the national stage to our state, what's your reflection on what you've been seeing?
I see a lot of folks interested and intrigued by our governor. Various folks think he did a good job stepping up to the crisis that was handed to him that he didn't want and didn't expect. But clearly there's a lot of folks, there's some on the right who want the, burn everything down kind of approach. They want the rougher politician, and he's not true enough to them. And then clearly those that want the kinder healer type politician, he's not good enough for them. Mm-hmm. So then he starts to, is he a man without a country in terms of, or without a coalition when it comes to those things? Some would say, yes, he absolutely is. And some will say, well, no, he's building a coalition of those folks that appreciate the type of leadership he was showing in a very difficult situation.
What do you think this moment calls for in terms of leadership?
Right now, what I think it calls for is, one, somebody who will be partly that rougher politician who will speak truth to his or her own team, which is hard to do. Yeah. It's easy to sing to the choir, but it's hard to preach to them when they don't want to hear it. But it's also going to take a lot of work to say, you're not just rolling over to the other side. Yeah. But we have to come together. I think you and I agree, political violence is unacceptable.
Completely.
We should debate our differences. Sometimes we're going to learn from each other. Sometimes we're going to learn that, I think Shireen's wrong, or I think John's wrong, and that's okay. Yeah. But that's the way to do it, is to engage and dialogue and learn from each other and express our opinions vehemently, but respectfully.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about kind of some overlapping opportunities, right? I know that our governor is concerned about the loneliness epidemic. I'm concerned about how much time people spend online. I think I'm really interested in what would it look like to see a meaningful plan behind the rhetoric. How do we, the Disagree Better campaign, which I think I often feel is lackluster in execution. When harmful bills are signed into law, when Utahns, when surveyed, feel like their, elected leaders are out of touch with the things that are impacting their daily lives. What does it actually look like for us to bring people together in community and have conversations across difference? I'm grateful for this time that we have together, and I would just really continue to encourage people to find ways to speak in difference, to come together and have these opportunities.
I'm John Dougall. That's Shireen Ghorbani. You've been listening to Both Sides of the Aisle.
Anthony Scoma is our producer, and we thank you so much for tuning in.